Located in East Africa, Uganda is neighbored by Kenya to the east, South Sudan to the north, the Democratic Republic of Congo to the west, Rwanda to the southwest, and Tanzania to the south. In this episode, we explore how a nation shaped by ancient monarchies and chieftains defined its modern era post-independence. Our story begins with the British arrival in Uganda in the late 19th century, where several tribes lived and traded with each other within Uganda and the East African region. Within a few years, in 1890, Captain Frederick Lugard became the military administrator of Uganda under the British East Africa Company. Through this, indirect rule was established, favoring the dominant Buganda above all other kingdoms. By 1894, Uganda became a protectorate. Baganda agents and soldiers were deployed to dominate other ethnic regions like Bunyoro and Lango. This sub-imperial role led to deep resentment, bringing the rise of the Nyangire Rebellion between 1905 and 1907, named after the slogan, "I reject the Baganda." Meanwhile, as part of the broader economic strategy, the British introduced cash crops such as cotton and coffee, driving rural transformation in the early 20th century. From 1921, Uganda began a slow and uneven process of political development under British oversight. The establishment of the Legislative Council initially excluded Africans and even Indians despite their key role in commerce, who refused to join until 1926 due to unequal representation. Most Africans showed little interest at first. In Buganda, the Lukiko, which was the local Bugandan parliament, remained more influential to the local elites than the colonial legislature. But it was only a matter of time until things changed. The rise of younger, Western-educated elites saw new chiefs who were more compliant with the British administrative needs, gradually replacing older traditional leaders. By World War II, Uganda had become more self-sufficient, and the British briefly loosened their grip. However, a 1945 riot led to a return to centralized control, revealing the fragility of colonial reform. In the post-war period, more Africans were appointed to the Legislative Council, and by 1954, they held half of the non-official seats. A ministerial system followed in 1955, and by the late 1950s, political parties began forming. The Democratic Party, DP, led by Benedicto Kiwanuka, appealed to the Catholic Baganda and other marginalized groups. In response, the Uganda People's Congress, UPC, emerged, led by Milton Obote and claiming a cross-ethnic base outside Buganda. To counter both, conservative Baganda elites launched Kabaka Yeka, KY, to preserve monarchical interests. Come March 1962, Uganda gained internal self-government with Kiwanuka briefly serving as Prime Minister. But in elections held just a month later, the UPC, allied with Kabaka Yeka, defeated the Democratic Party. Uganda went on to gain full independence on 9 October 1962, with Milton Obote becoming Prime Minister while Kabaka Mutesa II was named President in a ceremonial role. But this was all a strategic move for Obote, as his masked alliance with the Buganda establishment quickly unraveled. A 1964 referendum returned the lost counties Buyaga and Bugangaizi to Bunyoro, alienating the Buganda leadership. In 1966, following an arms scandal and a political rift with his army commander Idi Amin, Obote suspended the constitution and assumed emergency powers. He arrested 5 ministers and sent the army led by Amin himself to attack the Kabaka's palace. Mutesa fled into exile, and Obote then enacted the 1967 Republican Constitution, abolishing all kingdoms, stripping Buganda of its special status, and declaring himself executive president. From the early years, Obote's leadership grew more centralized and authoritarian. His Common Man's Charter, launched in 1969, promoted African socialism, nationalizing foreign farms, expanding state control over the economy, and promising to remove feudalism. But Obote had a more urgent matter at hand. His over-reliance on Langi and Akoli dominance in the military stirred resentment amongst other groups. In other words, for Obote to consolidate his political leadership in Uganda, he had to utilize the divided lines and sectarianism the British had created during colonial administration. But soon, Obote's fears were due to come true. During a visit to the Commonwealth Summit, Amin launched a coup and deposed him. Amin's takeover was initially greeted with cautious optimism both domestically and internationally. But this didn't last long. In true dictator style, Amin abolished constitutional structures and concentrated power by purging the Akoli and Langi offices. Then came the historic expulsion of 70,000 Asians in 1972, dismantling the country's economic backbone. Their businesses were distributed among military and political elites, leading to economic collapse and diplomatic isolation, which saw the rise of black markets. But this was just the beginning of Amin's reign of terror. The following years saw mass killings, disappearances, and repression under his rule. The Public Safety Unit and State Research Bureau operated as death squads. It's said that an estimated 300,000 people died under his rule. Civil service decayed and survival became a daily struggle. But in 1978, facing internal unrest and seeking to rally nationalist sentiment, Amin made a political blunder by invading Tanzania around claims that he was taking back the land that once belonged to Uganda. He immediately faced retaliation as Tanzanian forces supported by Ugandan exiles overthrew him in April 1979. The Uganda National Liberation Front (UNLF), formed in Moshi, Tanzania that year, established a transitional government. Yusuf Lule became president but was soon replaced by Godfrey Binaisa. But instability still persisted. By 1980, a military commission led by Paulo Muwanga organized elections widely seen as fraudulent. Obote returned to power, but opposition leader Yoweri Museveni, alleging rigging, launched a guerrilla war. Obote's second term, from 1980 to 1985, was no better than the first. Marked by economic decay and civil war, Uganda remained unstable. Once again, the military dominated by Akoli and Langi committed atrocities in central Uganda. Meanwhile, Museveni's National Resistance Army was gaining support, particularly in the Luwero Triangle, which became both a strategic base and a powerful symbol of resistance against state brutality. And for a second term, Obote had not learned his earlier mistakes. Once again, deep-rooted ethnic divisions in the army had festered to the point of collapse, ultimately culminating in his overthrow by General Tito Okello in 1985. Okello's takeover was short-lived, as the junta failed to stabilize the country, creating the perfect conditions for Museveni's NRA to capture Kampala in January 1986, marking the beginning of a new era. Museveni's government launched what he called a fundamental change, promoting inclusivity, decentralized governance, and economic recovery. Through this, his main aim was to address the injustices of the past and mend the deep-rooted divisions, ethnic, regional, and political, that had fragmented Uganda since the colonial era. Additionally, the no-party movement system suspended traditional party politics to avoid sectarianism. Local resistance councils evolved into governance structures. In 1995, a new constitution was enacted, reinstating monarchy symbolically and enshrining civil rights. Museveni liberalized the economy, invited back the expelled Asians, and stabilized Uganda's finances. Having made significant strides, international donors praised Uganda's reforms, and Museveni went on to win elections in 1996 and 2001. Yet, despite these achievements, one region remained firmly beyond Museveni's reach: northern Uganda. The Lord's Resistance Army (LRA), led by Joseph Kony, waged a brutal insurgency. Despite government efforts trying to end the conflict and capture Kony, they failed repeatedly, leaving the LRA to spread into neighboring countries. By 2005, Uganda held a referendum that ended the no-party system and restored multi-party politics. But this political liberalization came with a move that raised alarm. Parliament also scrapped presidential term limits, paving the way for Museveni to stand again in 2006. He won the re-election that year and again in 2011 and 2016, each contest marred in controversy. During this period, the main opposition leader Kizza Besigye was repeatedly harassed and detained, with his supporters often facing state intimidation. In 2021, the challenge came from a new generation: Robert Kyagulanyi, better known as Bobi Wine. The pop star turned politician energized Uganda's youth, many of whom had grown up knowing only Museveni as president. Like Besigye, his campaign was met with repression, arrests, beatings, and internet blackouts. Once again, This proven tactic saw officials hand Museveni another victory with over 58% of the vote. Despite Wine rejecting the outcome, citing widespread irregularities and violence, the courts dismissed his petition and the NRM retained a dominant parliamentary majority. And that concludes Uganda's post-independence journey to date.